Welcome back. Today we're going to work on fixing an RX-20. As you probably know, all we use in our fleet are the low-speed RX-20s, simply because they do a great job and they're cheap. The highest I've ever spent on one was $1,300 back when I didn't know better. Nowadays I usually spend for a used RX-20 low-speed around $400, usually around $400 to $500. So that's a great deal in my opinion. But what happened here is this RX-20, we just simply pulled the switch, nothing happened. So that tells me some electrical problems is going on, so we had to wand the rest of the job and we brought it home. So here's a few things we test for those of you unfamiliar with the RX-20. Find the switch does not work and nothing's turning. First thing we do is we'll direct plug. This plug underneath, this is underneath the RX-20. Back up a little bit, just turn it on its side. Just take an extension cord and do a direct plug right into the motor. And if it turns, then we know it's a switch problem. If it doesn't run, then we know it's from here into the motor, and perhaps it might be a motor issue. In that case, we just simply rebuild the motor, or sometimes if it can't be rebuilt, we simply buy a new one. So that's one test that we do. So if it does work, then it's probably something in the switch, which is up in the handle. Pretty easy and inexpensive. But what we're going to do today, I've checked that, and I found some sparks right underneath the motor. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the motor out, and we're going to fix and replace this switch. And I'm not going to get a Hydromaster one, they are too expensive. So we're going to put something together by something I just have laying around. And I will probably have to take one trip to Lowe's. So let's get it on the workbench. For those of you unfamiliar with an RX-20, they simply have 8 bolts. And that's it. We're going to remove these bolts. Most of them are going to have an Allen wrench head. These have been replaced. So we've got 8 bolts, 4 on one side, 4 on the other. Those need to be removed. This is a 7/16 head. This needs to be removed and disconnected. We'll leave the rotary union on. And of course, if you can still find these, that's great, but we just simply remove this and take the cover off. So we take the cover off first, disconnect, unplug like I've showed you, remove these 8 bolts, and then the whole thing lifts out. And so let's take a look. We're going to do that and put it on. Sorry for the noise in the background. We're working on some rugs, getting them dry. Okay, so I got the motor out. I have it upside down here on the bench. The motor has a plate, simply 3 bolts, and sometimes if they're jammed in there, a 1/4 inch wrench will help them along because they're flat head. And so just be careful of that. I have pulled the wires out and they're free, so I can take a look at them. And I have loosened this Romex connector, mostly just these 2 screws. This is called a Romex connector, 3/8 inch. They're available, really inexpensive at any hardware store. So I went ahead, this one's fine, so I'm going to keep it there. Now what I'm going to do is there's a couple ways I can go about this. I could keep these wires and just splice into them, or I can go ahead and put new connectors on there. Today I'm going to splice into these wires, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's what I grabbed. I grabbed a couple feet of it's called 12/3 service cord. Make sure you get stranded. 12/3 is the gauge of the wire inside, if you don't know already. This motor is rated for a number 10 wire, but 12 is fine. So we're going to put 12/3. I'm going to put this right in here, and I'm going to get this through, and I'm going to start working on my makeup. I just simply pushed it through. Now I'm going to get this Romex connector clamped back down, and then we're going to go ahead and start making it up. There it is. Now I'm going to cut this open, and we're going to start manipulating. I would suggest using a drywall, sheetrock knife, utility knife. This is something I've had for years. How do I know it's old? It's made in the USA, go figure. So what I'm going to do, it's nice, I'm going to keep my hands free, and I'm just going to gently open up the outside. Cut off excess. Make sure you don't use any smaller. Don't use 14/3, 16/3 kind of extension cord you'd use for your Christmas lights. Get the heavy stuff. Make sure it's 12/3. And of course, we're going to match these up. Simple, round. The white is your neutral. That's white to white. black to black. So it's nothing to be afraid of. Black to black, white to white, green to green. Real simple. So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and I'm just going to direct wire this with a circle connector right back onto this ground screw. So you can see that right there. And so let's do that. Screwed in, ready to go. Ground wire is done. So we're going to move this out of the way. We got better things to do. Now we're going to splice these wires together. Okay, what we're going to do is this is the old one. This is one that's got, this is on the motor side. So we're going to just trim this off a little bit so we get enough room for working. Twist the wires. Now we got our simple crimp connector. Put it on, and I'll crimp it down. I could probably put more secure connectors on here, but this is all going to be in here. This is immobilizing the wire, so nothing's really going to move in there. So I'm confident that this connector will be fine. Now before I connect this other side into here, I'm going to start what's called a heat shrink. This is going to cover the connection just to make sure there's no moisture or limited amount of moisture that gets in here. From what I'm seeing here, it doesn't look like a lot of moisture gets in here anyway, but still I would rather be sure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure how much I just eyeball how much I think I'm going to need. I just want enough to cover the connection and slide it on. I'm going to trim off this other side. Get a little bit shorter so I have limited amount of room. I'm going to press this down in here, so I want to be able to get it short enough to be able to leave room, but also long enough that I can at least manipulate it down there. So use your judgment, don't overthink it. Stripping it, twisting the wire, putting it together, and sissy crimping it. So do 1 second. And there it is. I'm going to slip the heat shrink over the whole connection. Black tape is also another good idea. I like heat shrinks better. Plus, you imagine trying to wrap this really tight in black tape. Anytime you use black tape, you want to get it nice and tight. So it's not practical to loop it through. So this heat shrinks are more practical. I get my heat shrinks at Harbor Freight once again. Extremely cheap, and they're handy to have. So now we're going to heat this up and get it shrunken down, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it back, and we'll do the same thing on this. Here's a close-up of the finished product. You can use a lighter, a flame, a torch. I use a heat gun, and it just takes a little bit. That way I'm not singeing any wires or anything like that, and maybe it's just because I'm more particular, but anyway, I used a heat gun to shrink this up. Now we're going to move this out of the way. Just put it down here the best way possible. And of course the last ones will be what we call our hot leg, or this will be the black wires. So let's get to that right away. Just as a side note, you'll notice before I hit the camera, I rerouted this neutral wire. It was going this way, but the problem is, if you can see that, if I can move it over just a little bit, on the bottom of your screen, that's the hot leg. So what I did is I just pulled this off to get it out of the way. The neutral wire was rubbing against this hot leg, so there's going to be some vibration, and I don't want it going through and shorting. So what I did is I pulled everything apart and I ran the neutral wire, because its destination point is right here. I ran it way back behind, if that makes any sense. So anyway, it was on the top. I ran it way behind so nobody can see it, and so it's not rubbing against anything. The hot leg, I'll use the same care to do the same thing. So let's get this together. We're going to splice these two together. So I'm probably going to make my cut right about here. The wire is going to lay here. I'm going to tie it here, so I think I'm going to make my cut probably about right here. You can eyeball it. This connection looks a little boogered, so I'm going to go ahead and restrip it. there's a little extra room right down in there that I pushed the wire down. So everything is organized, everything looks like it's pretty straightforward. I don't see any wires rubbing on any apparent issues, so now I'm going to go ahead and put the plate on. Okay, now I've got some extra cord here. I always buy extra cord and keep some as a spare. But we've got, the concern is, I don't want to put a lot of strain on this Romex connector, because then it'll go back to being short again. But I don't want to put too much of a loop where it's going to drag on the carpet as I'm cleaning. So we need to find out how much I'm going to need, too much or too little. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to set this in the RX-20, and I'll show you that, and then line up with a piece of tape and mark it where I want to make my cut. Okay, so I just set it in there. I didn't bolt anything down. Then I'm just going to look underneath and take my mark. Okay, this is a view from behind the RX-20. I'm just going to do kind of a visual, how it hangs. Like I said, I don't want too much where it's going to drag on the floor. So I'm trying to figure out where to put my cap. So I think I'm going to put it, if it hangs right there, I think I'll be happy. So I'm going to make my mark right about here. Okay, we're back on the bench. I got my mark here. I'm going to go ahead and make my cut. So now, what we have to do is put this cap on. You can get cheap caps and small caps. I want the heavy duty one. Okay. Now we're going to put this on. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and cut away our insulation and get our connections ready. Now it's time to skin. Most of you are familiar with how everything goes, but take a good look. We've got black, green for ground, and white for neutral. So that's how we're going to set it up. We're going to put the white wire, the green wire in there, and the black wire in there. So underneath, you've got corresponding slots that you're going to stick the wire in. The bare end of the wire is going to go into the corresponding slots there. So let's do that. Okay, so I trimmed out this outer insulation to give the wires a little more room to move. So right now I've got the black wire in. I'm going to go ahead and cinch that one down. Good and tight is always good. As tight as. And I'm going to help this ground wire get in as far as it can go. Last but not least, the neutral or the white wire. Some tight. All I'm doing is bulking this up to give these grippers a little more to hang on to, is all. Last thing now is put the cap on. Okay, let's see how we did. And it runs. Okay, the new cord is plugged in. The RX-20 is plugged in. Short of cleaning it up, getting it ready for the road, let's see how it runs. Well, we got them cleaned off. Got the star wheel pressure washed off. Cleaned off the RX-20. So now we're going to put the felt ring in and spin the star wheel on and be done. Okay. And that's it. So we have one more RX-20 that we need to rebuild, put new seals in, and so when that time comes I'll make sure to make a video of that. So thanks for watching.